The morning Laurel Dempsey walked into a pawn shop with her service medals in a grocery bag, she told herself she wasn't going to cry. She'd promised herself that in the parking lot of the Carrefour strip mall on the edge of Sudbury, standing in the gray November wind with a plastic bag twisting in her hand and her car making that ticking sound it made now when the engine cooled. She'd been a trauma nurse for 6 years. She'd held people's hands while they died. She was not going to cry over a transaction. The shop was called Garrison's. It had a hand-painted sign and a display window full of electric guitars and power tools, and in the far corner a small velvet tray of military pins that made her stomach drop when she saw it. She pushed the door open anyway. The man behind the counter was maybe 60, with a white beard trimmed close and reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. He looked up when she came in. He had the kind of face that didn't give anything away. "Help you?" he said. "I have some things," Laurel said. She set the bag on the glass counter. "Military Service Medals. They're in good condition." He didn't reach for the bag right away. He just looked at her. Not unkindly, but with the kind of steadiness that made her want to look away. "Take your time," he said. She opened the bag herself, laid them out one by one on the velvet pad he slid across to her without being asked. The General Service Medal, the NATO Medal from her deployment to Camp Mirage 2018, the Sacrifice Medal, which she hated to even touch because of what getting it had cost. And the last one, the one she'd almost left home, the Meritorious Service Medal, which Brigadier General Fontaine had pinned to her chest in front of 60 people at CFB Borden while her mother cried in the second row. She hadn't told her mother about this morning. She hadn't told anyone. She was 3 months behind on her apartment in Lively. Her car insurance had lapsed 2 weeks ago, which meant every drive she took was technically illegal, which was a detail she'd filed away somewhere between the collection notice from the Ontario Student Assistance Program and the voicemail from her landlord that she still hadn't listened to. She'd been suspended without pay from St. Brigid's Regional 6 weeks ago, pending an internal review. She'd filed a workplace complaint against the chief of nursing, Patricia Holt Warren. Patricia Holt Warren had filed a counter-complaint the same day. The process, her union rep had told her, could take up to 8 months. She did not have 8 months. She watched the man behind the counter examine each medal carefully. He turned the Meritorious Service Medal over and read the back and then set it down very gently, the way you set something down when you understand what it is. "Canadian Armed Forces," he said. "Reserves, then full-time. I did 8 years before I went into nursing." "Afghanistan?" "No. UAE. Cyprus. 1 tour in Latvia." He nodded slowly. "These are in excellent condition." He paused. "I'd give you 400 for the lot." She'd known it would be something like that. She'd looked up valuations online at 2 in the morning 3 nights ago, sitting on her kitchen floor because she hadn't wanted to look at her laptop at the kitchen table, as if the floor made it less real. 400 was on the low end, but she'd known it would be low. That was how pawn shops worked. You came in holding something that mattered, and you left with a fraction of what it was worth, and the fraction was all you were going to get. "Okay," she said. She didn't cry. She was keeping that promise to herself, at least. The door opened behind her with a rush of cold air, and a man walked in, and she stepped to the side to make room at the counter, and that was when she noticed the dog. It was a Belgian Malinois, tan and black, with a tactical vest that said Richard K9, "Do not pet" on the side panel. It was on a leash held by the man who'd just come in, mid-40s maybe, in a canvas barn jacket, with the kind of posture that meant military without him having to say so. He had a list in his hand. He was clearly here for something mundane. He gave Laurel a brief nod, the way Canadians do, then looked at the man behind the counter. "I called about the generator," he said. "Back of the shop. Garrett'll show you." But the dog wasn't moving. The dog had stopped at the counter where Laurel's medals were laid out, and it was standing very still with its nose just above the velvet pad, not touching, just breathing. Its tail wasn't wagging. It wasn't a playful kind of still. It was the kind of still she'd seen military working dogs do when they were alerting. That total, focused concentration, every muscle switched on. The man looked down at his dog, then at the medals, then at Laurel. "She doesn't usually do that," he said. "She's probably just smelling them," Laurel said, because she didn't know what else to say. "She knows what medals are," the man said quietly. "She deployed with me. She knows what it means when they're in a bag on a pawn shop counter." That was the thing that finally made Laurel's eyes sting. Not the $400, not the 7 months of fighting the hospital. Not even the Meritorious Service Medal, which she'd earned by pulling 2 soldiers out of a vehicle during a training accident in Cyprus that had gone terribly wrong. It was a retired Belgian Malinois who had stopped walking and simply refused to look away. The man's name, it turned out, was Gideon Rawl. He was a retired warrant officer, Royal Canadian Regiment. He'd done 4 tours, 2 in Afghanistan, 1 in Mali, 1 in Latvia. Latvia the same rotation as her, though they'd been in different units and hadn't crossed paths. He'd been in Sudbury for 3 years, working as a safety supervisor at a mining company, living on a property just outside of Chelmsford with the dog, whose name was Boz, short for Basra, where she'd been trained. He bought her a coffee from the Tim Hortons 2 doors down. He asked if she'd eaten. She said she had, which was almost true. She'd had a banana and a handful of crackers before leaving her apartment, which she'd eaten standing at her kitchen window watching the neighbor's kids wait for the school bus. She told him about St. Bridget's. She hadn't planned to. It came out the way things come out when someone asks the right question at the right moment, which in this case wasn't really a question at all, just him saying, "You want to tell me what's going on," in the same level voice people used when they were actually prepared to hear the answer. 6 weeks before her suspension, Laurel had been the charge nurse on the night shift in the ICU. They'd had a patient, a man in his late 70s, post-cardiac surgery, who'd been deteriorating for 3 days in ways that weren't adding up. His family was being told he was stable. His chart said he was stable. But his chart also had a pattern that Laurel recognized: subtle medication errors, documentation gaps, a pattern of incidents that clustered around certain shifts and certain staff. She'd brought it to the attending physician, Dr. Sefton. He'd told her she was overreading the data. She'd brought it to the unit manager. The unit manager had told her to focus on her own patients. She'd filed a formal incident report through the hospital's internal safety system, which generated a reference number, and as far as she could tell, nothing else. The patient died on a Thursday morning. The family was told it was expected. The family had not been told about the incident report. The family did not know, as far as Laurel could determine, that 3 nurses had flagged concerns in the 2 weeks before he died. She'd gone to the College of Nurses of Ontario. She'd gone to the Ontario Ministry of Health's Patient Safety Office. She'd sent a letter, registered, to the Hospital Board of Directors. 2 weeks after she sent the letter, Patricia Holt-Warren called her into her office and told her she was being suspended pending a review of her clinical conduct, specifically an allegation that she had breached patient confidentiality by sharing information about a patient with unauthorized third parties. The letter she'd sent to the hospital board had been treated as disclosure of confidential patient information. "That's not what whistleblower protection law says," Gideon said. "I know that. My union rep knows that. But the review process is the review process, and until it concludes, I'm suspended without pay, and I can't take other nursing shifts because the suspension flags when employers run a license check." She turned her coffee cup in her hands. "I have about $600 in my account. After today, about 1,000. Gideon was quiet for a moment. Boz was lying under the table with her head on her paws, watching Laurel with amber eyes. "You talked to anyone in the military community?" he said. "I didn't think this was a military problem. Everything's a military problem when you've got a Meritorious Service Medal and you're selling it at garrisons," he said, and it wasn't harsh when he said it, just matter of fact. "You've got a network. Most people in your position don't use it because they think they're supposed to handle things alone." "I've been handling things alone since I was 22, she said. "I know," he said. "Most of us have. That's the problem, not the solution." He made 2 phone calls from the parking lot while she finished her coffee. She could see him through the Tim Hortons window, Boss sitting at his feet, Gideon speaking in the clipped, efficient way of someone who was used to briefing people. She didn't know who he was calling. She didn't ask when he came back in. "There's a woman named Colonel Elspeth MacIver. She's retired. She runs a veterans advocacy legal clinic out of Barrie," he said. "She's got a former JAG officer on staff. They do this. They help veterans who are in employment disputes that intersect with their service record, their benefits, their mental health documentation. She said she can see you Thursday." "I can't afford a lawyer. It's pro bono." She's not a charity, but the clinic is funded through the Ontario Trillium Foundation and the Royal Canadian Legion. He paused. She also said, and this is relevant, that your suspension letter has a procedural problem. If your union filed your grievance correctly, the hospital may have violated the Public Hospitals Act by treating your internal report as a confidentiality breach. There's case law. Laurel looked at him. How does she know about my suspension letter? You just called her. I described the situation. She's seen it before. He picked up his coffee. It's a particular kind of institutional retaliation. They know most nurses won't fight it because fighting costs money and time and credential risk. They're betting you'll sign a quiet settlement and go away. That's exactly what my union rep implied I should consider, she said. Yeah, he said. That's what union reps get paid to do. It resolves things. But it resolves them in the hospital's favor. She looked down at her coffee. Why are you doing this? She said. You don't know me. He was quiet for a moment. Boss shifted under the table and put her head on Laurel's boot, which was such a direct and uncomplicated gesture that Laurel had to press her lips together. I know what it means when someone who earned a Meritorious Service Medal is selling it to pay rent, Gideon said. That means the system that's supposed to hold people like you up has been doing the opposite for long enough that you've run out of options. That's not a personal failure. That's a system failure. And I've got time and I've got contacts, so. He shrugged, which was a very Canadian way to end a sentence like that. She went home with her medals. The man at Garrison's had refused to complete the transaction. He said he'd never actually done the paperwork, so there was nothing to undo. He said it in a way that made it clear he'd known, from the moment she'd laid them out on the velvet pad, that he wasn't going to buy them. She sat in her apartment in Lively that evening on her kitchen floor. Not to be melodramatic about it, she just found she thought better down there, closer to the ground. And she looked at the Meritorious Service Medal in her hand and thought about the training accident in Cyprus, about the vehicle on its side in a ditch off a dirt road, and the smell of diesel and burning, and how she hadn't thought about it at the time. She'd just done it, opened the door and gone in and gotten Corporal Arsenal out first, because he was making noise, which meant he was breathing, and then gone back for Private Lalonde, who wasn't making any noise but who turned out to be alive, barely, which was the kind of miracle that you accepted and did not question. Brigadier General Fontaine had said, at the ceremony, that Laurel Dempsey had demonstrated that the mark of character was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act in spite of it. She'd been 24 years old. She'd thought, standing on that parade square, that she understood what he meant. She understood it better now. Fear looked different at 29, in an apartment in Lively with a collection notice on the counter, but it still came down to the same thing. You acted in spite of it, or you didn't, and the choice was always yours. On Thursday, she drove to Barrie, illegally, still, but carefully, and met Colonel McIvor in a second-floor office on Dunlop Street that had a framed Legion poster on the wall and a very organized reception desk and a smell of good coffee. McIvor was in her early 60s, short white hair, reading glasses on a chain, and she had reviewed Laurel's files already. Gideon had sent them ahead, which meant Laurel had spent Wednesday evening scanning every document she had, which had taken 3 hours and felt like assembling evidence for her own trial. McIvor took 40 minutes to go through everything. Her junior associate, a young man named Bertrand, who had the careful manner of someone who had recently passed the bar and was still slightly amazed by it, took notes in a yellow legal pad. At the end, Massavor took off her glasses and set them on the desk. Your hospital has a problem, she said. They seem to think I'm the problem, Laurel said. They think that's what they can make stick. There's a difference. Massavor folded her hands. Your original incident report was filed internally. It was then forwarded by you to the Ministry of Health's Patient Safety Office, which is explicitly protected activity under Section 25 of the Public Hospitals Act. What they've done is recharacterize that protected disclosure as an unauthorized breach of confidentiality. That's a misapplication of law. It's also a misapplication that has been tried before and it has failed before. She named 2 cases. Bertrand's pen moved quickly. What does that mean practically? Laurel said. Practically, it means your union should have filed for an injunction to reinstate you with pay pending the outcome of the review, because the suspension itself is potentially unlawful. If they didn't do that, your union rep has not served you well. A pause. Did they offer you a settlement? They implied I should be open to one. Of course they did. A quiet settlement costs the hospital some money and costs your union nothing. It would also require you to sign a non-disclosure agreement, which would prevent you from ever speaking publicly about what you observed in that ICU. Laurel felt something cold move through her. The family, she said. The patient's family. They still don't know what the internal reports said. McAvoy looked at her for a moment. No, she said, they don't. Does he have a right to that information? Posthumously? His estate does, potentially. That's a separate matter. But it's related. McAvoy looked at Bertrand, then back at Laurel. The clinic can take your case. We'll file for reinstatement immediately on the grounds that the suspension violates the Act. Separately, we'll put the hospital on notice that we're aware of the mischaracterization of your disclosure. That's usually sufficient to significantly change the hospital's posture. And if they don't change their posture, then we go to the Health Professions Appeal and Review Board, and we do it publicly, which hospitals hate more than almost anything else. Laurel looked at her hands. I don't have anything to pay you with, she said. The clinic receives funding specifically for cases like this, veterans in healthcare who are being pushed out for doing their job. We've taken 11 cases in the past 3 years. McAvoy paused. We've won 9 of them. What happened to the other 2? Settled. In both cases at terms favorable to the nurse. A very small, precise smile. We don't lose, Ms. Dempsey. We just sometimes negotiate. It took 4 months, not 8. In the 3rd week of February, a lawyer representing St. Brigid's Regional Health Center contacted Colonel McIvor's clinic to request a meeting. Bertrand, who by this point Laurel had come to think of as a kind of meticulous guardian angel in a good wool coat, sent back a 2-paragraph response that Laurel read 3 times because she had never seen legal language deployed with quite that degree of quiet confidence. The meeting happened on a Friday afternoon in a boardroom on the 14th floor of an office building in downtown Sudbury. Laurel sat on one side of the table with McIvor and Bertrand. Across from them were 2 lawyers from a firm in Toronto and, at the end of the table, Patricia Holt-Warren, who looked the way people look when they've been advised very firmly by their legal team to say as little as possible. The hospital's offer came in 2 parts. Reinstatement with full back pay for the 6 months of the suspension, the number which Bertrand had calculated to the cent was $38,470, and a formal written acknowledgement for Laurel's file only that the original suspension had been an incorrect application of the hospital's confidentiality policy. McIvor let them finish. Then she said, very calmly, there are 3 conditions not included in this offer that are required for our client's agreement. The hospital's lawyers looked at each other. The first condition was that the incident reports lead filed had all 3 of them be preserved in the hospital's patient safety records and not be expunged, altered, or refiled in a way that removed her name as the originating reporter. The second was that the hospital's patient safety office conduct a formal review of the ICU protocols during the period in which the patient had been admitted, the results of which would be shared with the hospital's board of directors. The third was that the legal department of St. Brigid's Regional Health Center send a letter to the estate of the patient, informing them that internal safety concerns had been raised during his admission and that those concerns were part of the hospital's ongoing review process. There was a long silence. One of the Toronto lawyers said that the third condition was unusual. McIvor said that it was the kind of unusual that was going to be reported on by the Sudbury Star, unless it was agreed to, because she had a call with a health reporter there on Monday morning that she was very much looking forward to. Holt-Warren said nothing. She was looking at the table. They agreed to all 3 conditions. It took another 6 weeks to finalize the paperwork, because hospitals moved slowly even when they had lost, and there was a version of the written acknowledgement that used the word misunderstanding instead of incorrect application, that Bertrand sent back with a single-line email that said he was sure the drafting team meant to use the second formulation and please resubmit. They resubmitted. Laurel got her first full paycheck in late March, direct deposited on a Wednesday morning. She was in the Tim Hortons on Paris Street when she got the notification. The same one she'd been going to on the mornings she could afford it since October, and she sat there for a long time with her coffee getting cold and the noise of the lunch rush building around her. She paid her rent. She paid 3 months ahead. She paid her car insurance and got her car's timing belt looked at, which turned out to be the source of the ticking. And the mechanic at the garage in Lively said, it was fine for now, but worth watching. Which was the kind of news that a few months ago would have felt like a verdict and now just felt like information. She called her mother. She'd told her mother some of it in carefully edited versions over the preceding months, enough that her mother had known things were hard, not enough that her mother had understood how close to the edge things had gotten. She told her more now. Not everything. Enough. Her mother said, I wish you'd called me sooner. Laurel said, I know, me too. She went back to work in the first week of April. The ICU was the same. The sounds, the rhythms, the particular quality of attention that the space required. Some of the nurses she'd worked with nodded at her. A few said they were glad she was back. One of the younger nurses, a 23-year-old from Timmins who'd started during Laurel's suspension and didn't know any of the history, asked her during a quiet moment where she'd trained, and Laurel told her, and then told her about the deployment. And the young nurse listened, the way young nurses listen to things that seemed very distant and turned out not to be. Dr. Sefton, who had told her she was overreading the data, passed her in the hallway on the second day and said good morning with a careful neutrality. She said good morning back with the same. There was a review. The ICU protocols were examined by an external patient safety consultant. 3 documentation practices were changed. 2 processes around medication reconciliation were revised. None of this appeared in the newspaper. Most of it was invisible to the people in the wards and the waiting rooms who had no reason to know what had happened. The patient's family. His name had been Gerald Fowler, 76, retired schoolteacher from Espanola, received a letter from the hospital's legal department in early March. Laurel didn't know exactly what the family had done with the information, or what they'd felt, or whether it had provided any kind of clarity or made things harder. That wasn't something she had access to. It wasn't something she would ever know for certain. She thought about him sometimes, in the quiet hours near the end of a night shift, when the ward settled and there was a particular quality of stillness that she'd never been able to describe to anyone who hadn't worked nights in an ICU. Not peaceful exactly, but present, everyone still breathing, the machinery doing what it was supposed to do, the whole careful work of keeping people alive continuing into another morning. She thought she had done what she was supposed to do. She had done it badly in some ways, and well in others, and it had cost her almost everything, and she hadn't been wrong. That was the thing she came back to. Not the money, not the reinstatement, not even the acknowledgement in writing that the hospital had applied its policy incorrectly. Just the bare plain fact that she had not been wrong, and she had not pretended she was, and she had kept going until there was no more going to do. Gideon texted her the day the settlement finalized. Just heard the news. Good, wrote back. Thank you. For the parking lot and the coffee and all of it. He wrote, Boss says hi. She'd gone to see them once, in December, driven out to Chelmsford on a Sunday afternoon, and Boss had met her at the door and shoved her nose into Laurel's hand the way dogs did when they'd decided you were someone worth checking on. Gideon had made soup. They'd talked for a couple of hours about the cases McIvor was running, about the mining company, about Latvia and winter, which they both agreed was beautiful and brutal in equal measure. Before she left, she'd stood in the driveway with the cold coming in off the fields and Boss sitting at her feet, and she'd looked at the medals in her coat pocket. She'd been carrying them since that morning at Garrison's, not sure what to do with them, not ready to put them away, and she'd thought, these belong in a drawer in my bedroom, not in a grocery bag in a parking lot, not in a glass case in a pawn shop. She put them in the drawer when she got home. She kept them there. She was not finished with the work. There were things she was still learning about how to fight and when and where to spend the fight. She was 29 years old and she had a long way to go and she knew it. But she also knew what she'd known on a dirt road in Cyprus at 24, which was that the presence of fear was not the same as the absence of options. She had options. She had always had options. The thing she'd needed was someone who could see them when she couldn't. That was what the dog had known, standing at the counter with its nose above her medals. Not that she was worth saving, because that was never in question, but that she hadn't run out of road. There was more road. There was always more road. She started her shift at 7. The ICU was full, the way it always was, the quiet machinery of critical care moving through the dark hours toward morning. Laurel Dempsey checked her patient list, pulled on her gloves, and got to work.